Hello to you. I do hope you're well. Welcome to this A-level religious studies video. I'm Ben Wardle, and today we are revising Joseph Fletcher's situation ethics. So we'll be talking through the foundations of situation ethics. We'll be looking at applications of the ethical theory, and of course we will be evaluating it as well. We will end by weighing up the strengths and the weaknesses of Fletcher's situation ethics. So yes, this video will cover all of the AO1 and the AO2 that you need to know for situation ethics. Let's start with a quick overview of situation ethics. These are the key components of the theory that we need to know for the exam. So we'll talk through them all in today's video. We'll start by talking about agape, which provides the foundation for Fletcher's situation ethics. And agape is a type of love. It is unconditional and selfless love. And he bases this on the example and the teachings of Jesus. And Fletcher looks at the example set and the teachings given by Jesus, and he says the most important thing that a Christian should be doing is putting agapeic love into practice. And so situation ethics is all about applying agape in every situation that you are in. We'll then have a look at the four presuppositions, so personalism, positivism, pragmatism, and relativism, and we'll look at what each one means. And then we'll have a look at the six principles, such as the end justifies its means. We'll then have a look at Fletcher's view on the conscience. He had a really interesting take on what the conscience is. He saw it as a verb rather than a noun. So it is something that we do rather than something that we have. And then this is a great chance for us to talk about his agapeic calculus, because he saw conscience as the label given to our attempts to make moral decisions. So when we are in each situation, it's the label given to those thought processes and those moral judgments when we're trying to apply agape and do the most loving thing. And then, as mentioned, we will conclude by looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of situation ethics. So you are able to make a judgment in your conclusion as to whether this ethical theory actually works. So let's get started with a look at some key quotes for an A-star essay on situation ethics. Because remember, in order to secure that A-star, you need to make sure you are referring to scholars and what they've said throughout your essay. So here are some short, memorable quotes that you can use in any essay you write on situation ethics. The first one is from a former Archbishop of Canterbury called William Temple, and he said that it is axiomatic that love should be the predominant Christian impulse. So this is the idea that in everything a Christian does, they should be seeking to show and apply love, that love should be driving everything that you're doing as a Christian. And of course, that idea is at the heart of Fletcher's situation ethics. Talking of Fletcher, I've got a great quote from him here. He said that love is the only universal. So love is the only thing that is always right. And that's why he says in every situation, you should seek to do the most loving thing. We've got a quote from Jesus next, the main man of Christianity, and he is, of course, the main man in situation ethics because it's all based around the example he set and the teachings he gave. So Jesus said, this is, of course, his golden rule, to love your neighbour as yourself. So this is at the heart of Fletcher's situation ethics, the importance of applying agape love. We've also got a great quote from St. Paul you can use here. He wrote to do everything in love. And again, this reflects the fact that for situation ethicists, they believe that a Christian should always do the most loving thing, that is the one rule and principle that they should always follow, to always do the most loving thing. And you can say there is scriptural support for that because Jesus said to love your neighbour, and St. Paul did say to do everything in love. And that is what followers of situation ethics strive to do. Another quote from Fletcher here, he said that love's decisions are made situationally. And of course, the clue is in the name. Situation ethics is about making your judgments on a case-by-case and situation-by-situation approach. So it's in that situation, in those circumstances, that you are making that judgment, you are making that moral decision. So you can't prescribe what is going to be right or wrong. You have to decide in that situation and in that moment. Another quote for you here is from William Barclay, who is a critic of situation ethics. So this is a great one for your evaluation. He said that situation ethics is not a very good approach to ethics at all. He, as I say, is very critical of it. He said it gives people a terrifying degree of freedom to just say to people, listen, all you need to do is do the most loving thing. Off you go and make your moral decisions. He says that gives people a terrifying degree of freedom. It's overwhelming for the individual and it could be exploited by individuals as well. He also said that situation ethics would only work if all men were saints. So he's saying that people do need more rules because they can't be trusted to go and make those decisions for themselves. You can't just say to people, go and do the most loving thing and trust that society will function well. He said it does not work. People need strict rules. And of course, you can link that in with original sin and the idea that we are sinful, we are born into a fallen world. And so we do need more rules than just do the most loving thing. As I say, that is quite open to exploitation. And you could argue that actually human beings can't be trusted. And then another critique from Barclay is that it provides no laws for everyday life. So of course, situation ethics is the idea that you should just do the most living thing in each situation. So it just gives you that one rule / principle. And Barclay is saying that doesn't work in practice. It might work in exceptional circumstances, but it doesn't work as an everyday normative theory of ethics. Think about driving, for example. We need rules of the road to keep everybody safe. Things like stop when there is a red light, follow the certain speed restrictions, drive on the correct side of the road. Imagine if you just abolished all of those rules of the road and said, just do the most loving thing. See what you think in the situation. We can see that everything would fall apart and there'd be absolute chaos on the roads, wouldn't there? So he is saying that it's insufficient and it's unsuccessful because it doesn't give us rules for everyday life. And of course, we do need them so that society can function and everyone can coexist harmoniously. And then finally, let's go back to Fletcher for a final key quote. And this is his quote about the conscience. He said, conscience is a verb. It's something we do rather than a noun, which of course is something that we have. So it's not a thing in itself. It is a label we give to our thought processes and our moral decision making in each moment. So more on that to come later, but they are your key quotes for an A-star essay. Make sure you pick a couple of them that you can then write about in your essay in order to secure the very top marks. Okay, let's have a look at the key headlines, shall we, for situation ethics. So I've got here 5 bullet points, do excuse me, just counting them there, which encapsulate the key important information you need to know for situation ethics. So the first thing to know is that situation ethics was developed by Joseph Fletcher in the 1960s, and he saw situation ethics as the middle ground between two extremes. So he saw it as the middle ground, as the midpoint between two extremes. On the one hand, antinomianism, which means having absolutely no laws at all. And on the other hand, legalism, which means rigid adherence to all laws and lots of laws. So he saw situationism as the middle ground, and it balances out the two because there is one fixed principle, which is love, that is then situationally applied. Now, critics of situation ethics say that it is not a successful middle ground. They say it actually descends into antinomianism very quickly. But interested to hear your thoughts about this, that situationism is a middle ground between two extremes. Antinomianism, which means no rules on the one hand, and legalism, which means strict, rigid adherence to all rules on the other hand. As we've mentioned, he based situation ethics on the teachings and example of Jesus, who prioritized, demonstrated, and advocated for agapeic love. So it's grounded in the teachings and the example of Jesus, based, of course, on the Gospels. Now, again, let's do a bit of AO2 critical analysis here. You could ask, is that the only thing that Jesus taught? Did he not want people to follow the 10 Commandments as well, for example? So again, do some critical analysis here. We could say it's great that it's based on the example set by Jesus, because of course, Christians believe he is the incarnate Son of God, so they want to follow in his footsteps and put his teachings into practice. But then you've got to ask, is that the only teaching he gave? Is that therefore the only thing a Christian should do, to just do the most loving thing in every situation? In terms of doing the most loving thing, then, it's really important, and this is bullet point 4, that you're really clear about what we mean when we say loving. Because love is quite a broad phrase, isn't it? And it, obviously has many different expressions. When we're talking about situation ethics, we're talking about agapeic love. And agape is unconditional, selfless love for others. And that is in contrast to other types, such as eros, which means romantic love. So when Fletcher says do the most loving thing, he's not saying do the most romantic thing in every situation. He wants you to maximize agape, which is unconditional, selfless love. So you could say this is actually quite a demanding ethical theory, because you are expected to be selfless in what you are doing when you are making moral decisions. And then our final bullet point, which brings everything together, is that Fletcher believes Christians should therefore always seek to do the most loving thing in every situation that they face. So what are we thinking? Is this a good approach to moral decision making? Is this an effective theory of ethics? Or can you already spot some flaws and some problems that might arise when we try to apply it in the 21st century? Well, let's get started by going back to the 1st century. We're going back 2,000 years to the life of Jesus Christ, who is, of course, the main man in Christianity, because Jesus provides the foundation for situation ethics. So, of course, it was developed by Fletcher in the 1960s, but the journey begins really 2,000 years ago with the life and the teachings and the examples set by Jesus, because Fletcher's situation ethics is based upon the teachings and example of Jesus Christ. And you could use in your essay, and I'd recommend you use in your essay, some examples of Jesus teaching about and putting into practice agapeic love. The golden rule, for example, to love your neighbour as yourself. He doesn't mean there to have romantic love for your neighbour, does he? He's talking about agape, to have this unconditional, selfless love for others. The healing on the Sabbath is a brilliant example to use, because this shows Jesus putting the rules of the day aside in order to do the most loving thing. So back then, healing on the Sabbath would have been actually unlawful, because on the Sabbath, it was a really strict day of rest. You were not allowed to do anything. So the fact that Jesus did something on the Sabbath shows that he was prepared to put the rules aside. He was prepared to go against the law in order to do the most loving thing, in order to heal somebody. And so you could say that shows a Christian must always prioritize love. They must always do the most loving thing. We've also got, of course, the famous parable of the Good Samaritan. And then, of course, we've got on Good Friday, his sacrificial death on the cross, which really does exemplify the idea that agape is selfless, because he was prepared to sacrifice himself on the cross so that humans could be forgiven of their sins. So that really does exemplify, doesn't it, how demanding agapeic love is, that you are selflessly doing things to help other people. So that is the foundation for situation ethics. It is the example and teachings of Jesus, and at its core is that agape love that he spoke about and that he exemplified. So let's move on now to the 4 presuppositions, and they are the 4 assumptions that situation ethics makes. So again, they provide the foundation for this ethical theory, and it is really important that you know the 4 of them and that you include them in your essay. So let's start with pragmatism. And this is the idea that situation ethics is about seeking practical solutions that will work. So remember it by thinking pragmatism means practical. And this reflects the fact that this ethical theory is grounded in experience as opposed to theory. So it's about asking, what should we do in this situation? So you don't get a prescribed list of rules of things you should do and things you shouldn't do. All that you're told is that in that situation, do the most loving thing. So it's about finding a practical solution rather than prescribing rules in advance. And we could say a strength of that is that it provides flexibility and it gives the individual autonomy. And that's why conscience is seen as something that we do, because it is our job to seek a solution. It is our job to make that moral decision. And that's why it's known as a pragmatic moral theory, and why pragmatism is one of the presuppositions, because you've got to seek a practical solution that works in that situation and in those circumstances. Our next one is relativism, and this is the idea that morality, by which we mean the right thing to do, is relative to the particular situation. And all that means is you can't say that certain things are always wrong, that it all depends on the situation. As I've put here, a situationist never uses words such as never or always. The only thing that is always right is love, and then you apply love in each situation. So you can't say, and this is obviously what the Ten Commandments do say, things like do not steal or do not lie, because morality is relative. So situation ethics acknowledges that there may be times, there will be times when stealing is the most loving thing to do. For example, if a mother is stealing to feed her starving baby. So for situation ethics, all morality is relative. It all depends on that situation. And of course, that is in clear contrast to the Ten Commandments, which say, do not kill, do not steal. And they are fixed and they are absolute. And in clear contrast to that, situation ethics is relative. So everything depends on the situation. And as I've said, love is the only universal, which is then applied in each situation. Our next presupposition is positivism. And this is belief in a God of love. And this reflects the fact that it is a religious ethical theory. So, of course, it means an atheist would not use it because they don't believe in God. But what it does mean is that for a follower of situation ethics, they believe in the importance of love. The Gospel of John in the Bible says that God is love. And again, this is at the core of situation ethics, because it means that love is supreme and should always be applied. But as I've put there, a possible weakness in terms of your AO2 is that this makes situation ethics unappealing to an atheist. They would not use it, they would not follow it, because they don't believe in a God, never mind a God of love. So that presupposition would be problematic in terms of an atheist in the 21st century following situation ethics. And then finally, personalism. Situation ethics puts people above laws. I think a brilliant example of this is Jesus healing on the Sabbath, isn't it? The fact that he prioritized healing somebody over following the law of the day, which was to not do anything on the Sabbath. And a great quote from Fletcher about this is that you should drop the legalist's love of law and accept only the law of love. So that is the idea that you shouldn't love laws, you should be loving people. So stop loving your laws and making everyone follow them. Focus instead on the people in front of you and showing them love, showing them agape. So instead of asking, when you are faced with a moral dilemma, when you are in a difficult situation, instead of asking, what does the law say about this? You've got to ask, who is to be helped? So this is an ethical theory that puts people first. The focus is not on the laws, it's not on the rules, it's on the people. So you should always put people above laws. And as I say, a great example you can use there from the Bible to give this support from scripture is Jesus healing on the Sabbath, because he quite literally puts that person he's healed above the laws of the day. So they are the four presuppositions. Make sure you remember them. They are pragmatism, relativism, positivism, and personalism. And you can refer to them and use them, of course, in your AO1 essay, but also in terms of AO2, you can critique them and you can talk about whether they are right when it comes to ethics. You know, compare this with Kant, for example. He didn't believe that morality was relative. He believed that we needed to have moral absolutes, and they are, of course, his categorical imperatives. So a really clear contrast here with Immanuel Kant and his deontological ethics. Let's have a look now at the 6 principles, because these are the 6 ideas that are essential to Fletcher's situation ethics. Now, You do not need to memorize them all. You wouldn't need to mention them all in your essay, but I would recommend memorizing and writing about 2 or 3 of them. And again, these are really important for your AO1, but also for AO2, because you can critique these. For example, only the end justifies the means. Again, Kant would be up in arms about that, wouldn't he? Because he says, no, everything is intrinsically right or wrong. You cannot say that the end justifies the means. He would be very much against that. So let's talk through these 6 principles, shall we? The first one is that love is the only intrinsic good. So the only intrinsically good thing is love, nothing else. Fletcher believed it is the one regulative principle of Christian ethics. He said, love is the only thing that is always good and right in every situation without exception, which is why you should always do the most loving thing. And he gives us his agapeic calculus so that we can make sure we work out the most loving thing in every situation. And remember, that is based on that biblical foundation, the example set by and the teachings given by Jesus. Number 2, love is the ruling norm of Christian decision making. So the ruling norm of Christian decision making is agapeic love. Always remember to be really clear about that. It is the belief that all Christian decision making should be based on agapeic love. Love can justify breaking any rule or commandment. So love is the one thing that is always right and that should always be applied. Our third one is that love and justice are the same, because love is justice distributed. This is the idea that justice is Christian love using its head, calculating its duties and obligations. So when you are being just, when you are being fair, you are being loving, you are distributing love. So love and justice are 2 sides of the same coin. That's because love is distributed to all within society via justice, and it's worked out using the agapeic calculus. Number 4, love wills the neighbour's good, whether you like them or not. This is really interesting because I mentioned earlier that situation ethics is quite demanding, and we can say that it's not sentimental. You know, loving is not about saying, oh, I love that flavour of crisps. Oh, I love that meal. I love that place. I love that person. It's not sentimental. It's not about attachment and connection. It's actually very demanding. Agapeic love is not like sympathy or affection. So it's not saying, oh, I feel sorry for them, so I'm going to do this. That would not be agapeic love. Remember, it's agape, which means unconditional and selfless. So there's no sympathy, there's no affection, there's no attachments, there's no favoritism. A great quote on this is that situation ethics, Christian love, excuse me, is the business of loving the unlovable. So love needs calculation. It can't be based on a feeling you have. It's about calculating it. It's not sentimental, and it wills the neighbour's good whether you like them or not. So it can't be because you like the person, you're going to help them. And that's what is illustrated, isn't it, by the parable of the Good Samaritan, that you have that duty to be loving, you have that duty to be selfless and help others, whether you like them or not. So that's where you could use the parable of the Good Samaritan as a really great example. Next one, the 5th one, is that only the end justifies the means. So the end goal of love justifies the means to get in there. We cannot refuse to do a deed which has a mainly good end just because it entails some evil. So we have to always ask, what end do we seek? So the end justifies the means, nothing else. So it's the idea, nothing is intrinsically evil, nothing is intrinsically wrong. It's all about the context, it's all about the situation. And of course, it's all about the end goal, and the end goal is love. So if the end goal is love, it doesn't matter how we get there. Now, again, you can use Kant to critique this, and you can use any deontology to critique this, because deontologists believe in that duty-based ethics, that the action itself is what we are judging. Whereas with situation ethics here, it's about the outcome. So the end can justify the means. And of course, we see that in utilitarianism as well, when Bentham gives us his hedonic calculus to calculate what will maximize pleasure and minimize suffering. we see a lot of similarities actually between situation ethics and utilitarianism, and this is one really clear one, that the end will justify the means. And then finally, number 6 is that love's decisions are made situationally, not prescriptively. And of course, we know this because we've talked about relativism already. Jesus, according to Fletcher, was a situationist. He was prepared to break the laws of the day in order to do the right thing. For example, he healed on the Sabbath and he forgave the adulterous woman. So he maximized love and he focused on love as opposed to focusing on the laws. He did not give teachings on many issues. And so Fletcher says we should fill in the gaps with love. So, if you're faced with a modern moral dilemma and Jesus didn't say anything about it in the Bible, you should think, well, Jesus always prioritized love, so I'm going to prioritize love. So the most important thing for a Christian to do is to prioritize love. And that is what Fletcher believes Jesus wants us to do, because he was a situationist who prioritized people and prioritized love over laws. And so that's what we should do in our moral decision making today. So have a look back through those 6 principles. And again, be making those judgments. Do you think that he is correct in what he's saying? What problems can you identify with what he is saying here as well? Okay, let's have a look now at the conscience and the agapeic calculus, because as I mentioned before, Fletcher has a very unique understanding of the conscience. And when we talk about the conscience, traditionally, we think of it as this thing that we have, or this voice that we have, don't we? But Fletcher saw it in a very different way. He said the conscience is a verb rather than a noun. So he saw it as something that we do, not something that we have. So what does he mean? Well, I've got a really brilliant quote from him here, which will really help us to explain and unpack what Fletcher actually believes about the conscience and also then the agapeic calculus. So he said this: the traditional error lies in thinking about conscience as a noun instead of a verb. This reflects the fixity and establishment mindedness of all law ethics as contrasted to love ethics. So he is contrasting here law ethics, which demand you follow certain laws and rules, with his love ethics, where there is one principle and rule that is situationally applied. And that is, of course, agapeic love. He said conscience is merely a word for our attempts to make decisions creatively, constructively, and fittingly. So what does he mean by this? Well, as I said, he believed conscience is a verb rather than a noun. So it's something we do, not something we have. He said conscience is something we do. It's an active process we engage in as part of love ethics. It describes what people do when they are trying to make moral decisions and are weighing things up. So whereas, with law ethics, for example, the idea is that the conscience is the voice of God giving you the rule and reminding you of the commandment. With love ethics, the conscience is you deciding for yourself. It's you in that situation making a decision using your agapeic calculus. So he says that it's important for us as moral agents and moral decision makers to use the agapeic calculus to calculate what will maximize love in each situation. And that is very, very similar to Bentham's hedonic calculus. You're just replacing the maximization of pleasure with the maximization of agape. So as it says here, the conscience for Fletcher is a noun. No, it's not a noun. I've just made a mistake. Do excuse me. It is a verb, not a noun. It is something that we do, not something we have. And we have to remember that and consider that within the framework of his love ethics. So for those who practice love ethics, conscience is you deciding what to do and how you are going to maximize agape in that situation. Whereas with law ethics, conscience is traditionally seen as this thing that we have, this voice of God within us, reminding us of a rule. So there is your clear contrast between those 2 types of ethics. So again, I would love to hear what you think as well about these 2 different ideas on the conscience. Which one do you think is right? Obviously, conscience is a standalone topic on the ethics paper as well, but great to refer to it in your situation ethics essay because it really represents and it really reflects Fletcher's love ethics, and the idea that love ethics are where the individual is making a decision, they're making a judgment based on that situation because they want to maximize agape in that moment and in that situation. So let's have a look at some applications, shall we, of situation ethics. And remember, a situationist never prescribes what is going to be right and what is going to be wrong. They're always going to say, it all depends. It's about what is right in that unique situation for those unique individuals. So they never say to never do something. They never say to always do something. They say that it all depends. You should make judgments and decisions situationally. But let's have a look at some potential applications. Let's have a look at what situation ethics might have to say on some moral issues. The first one is homosexual relationships, which you'll remember natural moral law was against because it violated the reproduction primary precept. But for situation ethics, you could say if the relationship is one in which love is fully served, then it may be permissible. But again, it's on a case-by-case, situation-by-situation basis. The same with heterosexual relationships as well. They would support a heterosexual relationship if love is fully served. But if that was an abusive or harmful relationship, they would be against it. Embryo research, if the end goal is to cure genetic diseases, then this is a loving thing to do, and the end justifies the means, which of course is one of the 6 principles. We've then got lying. We could say that in certain situations, lying may be justified if it is for a loving end. Because remember, love is the only intrinsic good. So you can't just say, do not lie. You can never lie, which is what the 10 Commandments do. Instead, you've got to consider the context. You've got to consider the reason and think whether the end goal justifies the means. So will lying be the most loving thing to do in this situation? And then stealing. In certain situations, for example, stealing to feed a starving child, stealing could be allowed. Again, the end justifies the means, and the end, of course, is maximizing agapeic love. So just 4 applications there of situation ethics, but always remember that with situation ethics, it all depends on the situation. We can't say that certain things are always wrong, certain things are always right. There's only one thing that's always right, and that is love, but love is situational. So you've always got to make that judgment in the situation. You can't say beforehand, you can't say universally. Remember, love is the only universal. So everything is on that case-by-case basis. And again, AO2-wise, is that actually practical? Will that actually work in practice? Surely, in a world of 8 billion people, we do need to have clear, fixed rules and laws. Otherwise, the entire legal system is going to collapse if you then have to go to the judge and just argue your case that you were trying to do the most loving thing. And then that's it. Well done. It's fine. We'll let you off. So, lots of problems we've got to start thinking about here as to whether this actually works in practice or not. So as we do start to make those judgments, we're going to move on to our AO2 and we're going to evaluate situation ethics. And we'll take a look at the strengths of this ethical theory. So we'll look at what we could call our strengths and our advantages of situation ethics. And then, of course, we'll look at our weaknesses, our criticisms, our disadvantages. And we'll look, for example, at Berkeley's criticisms and the problems he identified with situation ethics, so that you can then make your judgment as to whether this ethical theory actually works. Let's start by looking at the strengths, shall we? The first one is that it gives the individual autonomy, because you could say situation ethics empowers the individual to make moral decisions for themselves. Now, Berkeley is going to say that that's actually a problem because it gives them a terrifying degree of freedom, and actually that could be exploited because, people are not saints. However, you can say it is a strength because it empowers them as an individual. So it gives them that autonomy, it gives them that responsibility. So that means they can be held responsible for their actions because they can't say, well, I was just following the rules. They are the one that's made the decision in that situation, so they can be held responsible for it. Remember, people are given the Agapeic calculus and they are trusted to make decisions on a situational basis. And we can say that is good for the individual because they feel autonomous, and then we can hold them as responsible as well. Our next strength is that it provides flexibility. Remember, Fletcher said that love's decisions are made situationally. This means that the only absolute in situation ethics is love. This means you can apply the Agapeic calculus, or you can use the Agapeic calculus, in every situation that you are in. So this means situation ethics remains relevant and applicable in 21st century society. So we can say a strength is that it avoids becoming outdated because it can be applied to any situation anywhere. Remember, even if Jesus didn't say something about an issue, Fletcher says to fill in that gap with love. So you can literally apply situation ethics to any situation and to any moral dilemma. And again, if we compare with natural moral law, a criticism is that it's become outdated, for example, on sex ethics, whereas you can say situation ethics will eternally remain relevant because it is situational. There's just one thing, Agapeic love, that then needs to be situationally applied. So that flexibility can be seen as a good thing. And then a third strength is that it is consistent with the teachings of Jesus on agape. So Fletcher's situation ethics are grounded in the teachings and example of Jesus. We can say this makes situation ethics appealing for many Christians as they believe Jesus is the Son of God. So it emphasizes the importance and authority of his teachings, and it gives Christians a way to follow his example and his teaching. So they would like it because they do ask, what would Jesus do? He is the main man of this religion, isn't he? He is the incarnate Son of God. He is the main source of authority. And so Christians do want to follow in his footsteps and live in a way that is pleasing to him. So you could say this provides them with a framework to do that because it helps them to do the most loving thing in every situation that they face. However, if we do some critical analysis here, we could ask, is love the only thing that Jesus taught? Are there not other divine commands, rules, and laws from Scripture that need to be followed? For example, the Ten Commandments. So, is it a case of the only thing you're going to take away from your holy book, the Bible, is to do the most loving thing? Is that really it? Surely there's something else. There's other laws, other rules, for example, the Ten Commandments, that have authority as well. The whole Bible is infallible. So surely there are other rules and teachings that you need to take away. You can't just pick out agapeic love and say, that's all that we need. Well, that is what Fletcher does because it's what Jesus prioritized and taught about. But you could argue, is that really the only thing that you take away from the Bible? Surely there are other things, for example, the Ten Commandments, that are important as well. Let's have a look at our weaknesses now, shall we? And William Barclay is a brilliant scholar to refer to when you're talking about the problems with and the criticisms of situation ethics. So, for example, he said it gives a terrifying degree of freedom. He criticised situation ethics for giving the individual too much freedom. And he said it is, overwhelming and it's impossible to use because we need more rules and regulations than just love. He said it might work for exceptional situations, but it does not work for everyday life. For example, the rules of the road, we can't just replace all of those rules about how you can drive. For example, stopping at a red light, driving on the correct side of the road, all of those important rules that keep everyone safe. We can't just abolish them and say, do the most loving thing. Use your agapeic calculus to decide whether you're going to wait at that red light or not. So he says that situation ethics gives a terrifying degree of freedom, which overwhelms the individual. People don't have time to be following this. They have to get on with their busy lives. They can't be stopping every 2 minutes to get out their agapeic calculus and make a decision. Surely we need rules that people can just follow in life, because that makes life easier for everyone, as opposed to you, as I say, having to stop every 2 minutes to make another moral decision. So it gives too much freedom that overwhelms the individual and it causes chaos in society. He believed that situation ethics would ultimately descend into antinomianism if there were no rules and laws other than just do the most loving thing. Can you imagine the consequence of that and the absolute chaos that it would cause? So it is not a middle ground, it is a slippery slope to antinomianism. Our second weakness is that it is open to exploitation. I've got another brilliant quote for you from Berkeley here. He said that situation ethics would work if all men were saints. However, human beings are not saints. They are fallible and they do make mistakes. And you could link that in there with Augustine's view on original sin, for example. Furthermore, you could say people may use situation ethics to justify anything by claiming that they had intended to do the most loving thing, but for some reason, it ended up causing harm. And, you know, you could get out of jail free by using that, couldn't you? Because if it's all based on you saying, well, I thought that would be agapeic, how do you hold people to account? So yes, it gives them autonomy, but they can then exploit that. We could say it gives people too much autonomy and that this is open to exploitation. Surely we need more rules. If you think about the justice system, for example, imagine how it would work in a courtroom if the only rule people had to follow was do the most loving thing. How do you prove that in a courtroom, in a in a legal context, for example? And then finally, it depends on belief in God. Remember, one of those presuppositions is positivism, which is belief in a God of love. So situation ethics is based upon the teachings of Jesus. They arguably only have authority for Christians who believe he is the Son of God. And remember, you know, if you do believe that, then of course his teachings have authority, although you could say he does have other teachings beyond love, but certainly in terms of taking them seriously and living your life in accordance with them, that depends on your view of him, doesn't it? So if you do believe that he is the incarnate Son of God, then yes, you're going to make that effort and you're going to have that desire to live your life in accordance with his teachings. However, if you don't believe that, then why would you live your entire life based upon his teachings about agapeic love? So remember, this is very much dependent on belief in God and belief that Jesus is the Son of God and that the Bible contains the words of God. And as I said, one of the presuppositions is positivism, belief in a God of love. So if someone doesn't believe in a God of love, again, they wouldn't find this appealing. They might turn to utilitarianism, for example, because it doesn't depend on God. Instead, it's about maximizing happiness and minimizing pain. So that is our look at situation ethics. I do hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much for joining me and good luck with all your studies. Take care and have a good day.